Welcome to the refresher video for Science Unit 2, Lesson 9, Critiquing Science Research. So in this lesson, students are going to hone that topic that they had from Lesson 8, be able to explain it, cite specific evidence from their sources, and they're going to be able to engage in scientific inquiry. And they're going to do this by gathering and evaluating sources. They're going to form hypotheses. They're going to research evidence. They're going to work to provide support from text and across text, all to prepare for that final research poster symposium. So the first thing students are going to need to do is to take that topic that they generated in Lesson 8 and hone it. So thinking about, is their topic too broad or too narrow? So sometimes students are picking topics that are so cutting edge that they're not going to be able to find enough resources right now to do that project. So in a year or two, that might be a fantastic project for DNA and biotechnology. Right now, it might be something that is still being researched that there hasn't been enough publications on. So they want to think about, is it manageable? Is it something that they can do within the time frame of this project? So while some students might pick a topic that's too narrow, others might pick ones that are much too broad and could be a 10-volume series, but would be much too big for a poster symposium. So they want to take another look maybe at that list of possible topics to help them narrow it down a little bit or focus their ideas. They also want to think about, is it a topic that they're interested in pursuing? They need to find it at least interesting enough to research it for the next week or so and do a poster presentation on it. They also want to think about, will the findings be interested? Is it really a debatable issue? Is it something on which reasonable people could disagree? Those make the best topics when, it may be something that some people don't agree with and some people do agree with, but it does make for a reasonable conversation. So have the students work in pairs to think about those particular questions. You want to be sure to draw students' attention to the layout for the poster that is in their academic notebook and also in your lesson plans so that they can see all the different elements of the poster that will be required for them to do this poster presentation. And some teachers in the pilot studies have asked if it's okay for students to do this online rather than on a big poster board. That is completely up to you and the resources that you have in your room, but it would make a fantastic online presentation if that kind of resource is available to you. But students need to be familiar with all the different elements that will be in their research poster as they think about their topic, as they think about doing the research in order to gain information to put in their topic. Students need to think about the entire project to respond to this prompt in the academic notebook. In your own words, write a brief explanation of what the task is asking you to do. How will you go about selecting research articles, and what are the components of this task? And by asking students to generate this information themselves, they really need to focus on each part of the directions to be sure that they know what they're being asked to do, what they need to provide at the end, so it's not just a poster, it's also a handout, and what's expected of them throughout. So having them do this before they start to find their research articles should help them be able to narrow their focus enough to find stuff that's really going to be useful to them. We're also asking them to do a project planning timeline in their academic notebook. And so in order to help them break apart this big task, they're going to create several different times where they're going to work on this project. What needs to be done, setting goals for when, what resources will they need to complete each part, and what are their goals for each individual session. So you need to remind students that while we'll give them some time to work on this in class, they're certainly going to need to do some stuff on their own. You should also have them put at least one of the boxes in their project planning timeline as library time. So what are their goals for that time where as a class you guys are going to go to the library and do some good searching. So when you go to the library, it's important to talk about the kind of resources that we want students to find. So first of all, they have to be appropriate. So talk about appropriateness. They need to be able to understand the information, and The articles that they find must relate to the argument they're making in their poster. So sometimes they're going to find a lot of good stuff that's out there, but it's really not particularly useful for this particular project. So it needs to be appropriate for the research, and it needs to be helpful. It needs to add a contribution to the information that they need to know. The sources also need to be credible. So it's a good idea to talk about the difference between peer-reviewed research articles and commercial websites. So when we're talking about DNA, biotechnology, and health and agriculture, you will both find research articles and a lot of companies who are supporting this research. So talk about the differences in motivations and in credibility for those two different kind of sources. It's also a good idea to talk about government reports and websites. They can go to the National Institutes of Health and find a good deal of research there, most likely on their topic. So those are some good sources for them to use. In the lesson plans for you, there's a bunch of different resources available if your library does not have access to online journal articles. But if it does, that would be their first stop. The third thing they want to think about is the timeliness of the information. So in the sciences, current is best. So for this reason, because they're dealing with such new topics, journal articles are best. They're preferred over books because books take a while to come out, and you're going to find the more current information in peer-reviewed journal articles. So to talk about appropriateness, it's a good idea to show students the following sources. So we're going to take a look at the first sentence of the abstract of each of these. But even before we get to that, you can kind of look at the titles and think about, well, could I possibly understand this information? So have students look in the academic notebooks, are there full abstracts? We're going to take a look at the first sentence of each, but have them think about which article would and would not be appropriate to use for this project. So the first one, the abstract starts out NF kappa B. Now, if students already don't understand what that is, that's probably going to be a problem. Is a principal transcriptional regulator of the diverse cytokine-mediated processes, and so on and so forth. Students are most likely not going to understand what this means. Comparing that to the other abstract, demographic aspects of prehistoric populations have an important role in current archaeological theory and empirical research. In this study, blah, blah, blah. So this is something that students really would be able to understand. It's important to look at the sources, though, when you're talking about these two abstracts. One comes from Nature, the other comes from Science. Both of those journals are excellent resources for them to use, but the journal alone is not going to tell you enough information about the appropriateness. So they at least need to go in and read the abstracts. If they can't understand the abstracts, it's probably not going to be a good article for them. Now, if they can understand most of the abstract and not all of the abstract, we're going to call that still okay, because most likely as they read a little bit more and get some context, they'll be able to understand it. So if it's a judgment call, tell them go ahead and collect that article and see if you can understand it as you read through the whole thing later. So you guys are going to need to provide some library time for students to do their research. And when they get there, it's good to have like a full 50-minute class period if you can swing it. Remind students that they made some goals for their library time on their project planning timeline, so they need to refer back to that. This will be the only class time devoted to doing research in the library, so they really need to make the most of that time. Ask a librarian or you yourself point students to the best journal resources available. Again, those are probably online. And then remind students to use the article abstracts to help them make decisions. It's a good idea to stop midway to see where students are and what they need to do so they get a sense of how much they're getting done in that amount of time. And to remind them that any articles they need to get after this library time, they're going to need to do at home. So once students have their sources, we're going to work together on a review of reading scientific articles. So review the article that we also used in Unit 1 on how to read a scientific article, and remind students about that IMRD structure, right? Intro, methods, results, discussion, that most journal articles, but not all journal articles have. And what we're going to have students do is read this article on how to read articles while they're also working through all the suggestions that the authors make with one of the articles they found at the library. So stop along the way to have students identify the structure of one of the articles they found. So is there that intro, methods, results, discussion structure, or is there some other structure to the article? Have them respond to the questions that are along the way in that article on how to read a science article so that they can check their understanding of the article that they brought to class. There's an example there about finding inferences. Have them work through that and then think about the article that they found and what kind of inferences does the reader need to make in the article that they plan to use. On the section that talks about taking notes on the reading, have students take notes on the article that they brought to class, and then have them do at least one APA citation. So the end of their poster will be references, and they'll need to do those in APA. And there's a good introduction to how to do that in Unit 1 and a more complete look at it in Unit 2 as well. So there's lots of resources for you on APA style as well as for your students. And then for homework, ask students to take notes on the rest of their articles. So using those same questions that guided them from the how to read a research article strategy that you just did, have them do that with the rest of their sources at home so that they're ready to write a draft and their final poster. All of that occurs in Lesson 10. And so that is Lesson 9. Thank you.